Software vendors have a variety of sales tactics they do not want you to know about. That's what I want to talk about today. My name is Marcus Harris. I'm a software and technology attorney. For over 20 years, I've drafted and negotiated a variety of technology-related contracts and litigated failed ERP projects in courts around the country. One of the first software vendor sales tactics that we will see in the negotiations that we've been involved in is this false sense of urgency that the software vendor will instill in their customer. There's a threat of disappearing discounts. There's an end of quarter deadline, and if you don't sign, the discount that you've been able to negotiate over many months is going to just magically disappear. And I think to a large extent that really is manufactured. And I don't think I've ever, in over 20 years of negotiating these deals, I don't think I've ever seen a deal fall through, not happen because it didn't close by the end of the year, or because it didn't close by the end of a quarter. What I have seen is really a reformulation of that discount, but in most cases it's substantively similar. So I think the risk that really presents in a substantive way is pretty nominal. I don't think it's something that you need to really be overly concerned with. Really what your concern should be is trying to negotiate the best overall deal for your company. And I think if you're going to focus on discounts off of list and the percentage of discount that you're getting, I think you're doing yourself a disservice. Really focusing on the contract negotiation process in its entirety, putting together an agreement that tightly manages that vendor throughout that implementation or integration process or through the life cycle of your use of that product is going to save you more money over your use of that product over time than really any upfront discount that you might be able to negotiate. And I think these discounts can be substantive, and I think you really do need to negotiate them because you're leaving money on the table. But at the end of the day, I think you really want to focus on what's best for your company, getting an understanding of the risk profile of that agreement, understanding what your ability to use that software is, where the functionality gaps are. That's really going to serve you well, rather than simply focusing on this false sense of urgency and this ability to get a discount or not get a discount. The other thing that vendors don't want you to know is that this push to the cloud is really arbitrary. Deadlines for transitioning to the cloud are often made up. I think the deadline itself is certainly real, but it's arbitrary in its function. I mean, it's really a deadline that takes into account the financial needs of that software vendor, and it doesn't take into account your needs. The reality is that if you're being pushed to transition to the cloud, certainly then the presumption is that you've got an on-premise solution that you're utilizing, and most likely you're going to have a perpetual license to utilize that software despite the imposition of any kind of deadline to transition out. And really, I think the main concern with that is going to be that software is no longer going to be supported or serviced by that software vendor. But what they won't tell you is that more often than not, you're able to engage a third-party maintenance provider or service provider to be able to provide you with updates, upgrades, or modifications to that software, or at least maintain that software in a viable state moving forward. So I think the sense of urgency associated with this push to the cloud, the sunsetting of support for products, again, it's somewhat arbitrary. I'm not saying it's not real, and I think you need to take it into consideration, but if you're going to embark upon a brand new ERP implementation project, even a cloud project, that is a substantive investment of time, money, and effort. And if that does not fit within your timeline with respect to business pressures and business focus, then I don't think you need to do that. You don't need to engage in a substantive project when you're not ready, just because a particular vendor has a sunset date on the level of support that you're going to receive for your legacy product. One of the other things that vendors really don't tell you is that if the project is going to fail, it really isn't going to fail because of a failure of technology. Now, we will see that sometimes. In my career, I've seen it many times. But what's more common is that the implementation project is going to fail because of a mismanagement of that project on the vendor side. The vendor does not devote the A team to the project as they told you they would. They've got the C team or the D team. They've got a revolving door of different consultants that are coming in and coming out. They're using your project as a training ground for educating their consultants on how to use that implementation methodology that they're promoting. They pull them out when there is a higher revenue project. Those are some of the reasons why projects fail. And the software most likely is going to work, and it has most likely been implemented in multiple sites, thousands of sites across the world, depending on what vendor you're utilizing. Does it work for you? Maybe not. But one of the reasons why it may not work is because that particular vendor or integrator didn't devote the time and resources and manage that implementation project appropriately. And so it's not so critical then the technology or the functionality, but what is critical and where your implementation is going to fail. If it does fail, it's probably in relation to the integration modification of that software, that implementation project. And that means that those agreements, the MSA and the SOW, come to the forefront as being some of the most important agreements that you're going to sign. One of the other big vendor secrets is that you probably don't need the latest and greatest technology. They are going to push their shiny objects on you. They're going to show you a software demonstration that is going to razzle and dazzle you. They're going to talk about the latest artificial intelligence functionality that they're promoting and all the modifications and changes that they're going to make in that product roadmap over time, all to just wow you with the technology. And the reality is that most people that are upgrading or transitioning to the cloud or to a new software system, they've been on their legacy system for many, many years. And it still works. It may not be the most efficient, it may not be the most technologically advanced, but it gets the job done. And you probably do not need the cutting edge technology. Maybe you do if you're in a particular industry, but I don't think it makes any sense to lead with a technology first mentality. You don't want to be chasing the latest and greatest technology trends just for the sake of having that technology implemented in your organization. And if somebody's doing that, they're really doing you a disservice. I think you want to focus on the nuts and bolts, getting the basics correct, getting the fundamentals right with your technology stack, and really implementing that product to the best of your ability to get it to work the way you need it to work. The other thing that vendors will do is that they will sell themselves as a one-stop solution. They will be the software or technology provider of record for your company. They want you to put everything, all your business processes on their technology platform. And the reason they do this is, they know that they've kind of got you once they've done that, right? You've got your data in their cloud. You're now an official Microsoft shop, an SAP shop, an Oracle shop, whatever it is. And I think when you do that, you lose a ton of flexibility. It is not easy to transition off of one of these systems. You're really stuck for the long term, so to speak. If for whatever reason during the life cycle of your use of that product, it no longer serves your needs, you've got to anticipate how are you going to get off that system? How are you going to transition to a new system? What is the cost associated with that? How difficult is it going to be? Are you going to leave legacy data in that old system? Are you going to transition everything over to a new system? How are you going to access that data? Is there going to be a fee for any kind of transitional use rights to be able to continue to access that legacy software system? So, I think you lose a lot of flexibility when you decide to go with one vendor. I think there are advantages to that. There are also disadvantages to that, and I think you want to look very carefully at whether a multi-cloud environment, multi-vendor environment makes sense versus this one technology solution and being an Oracle or SAP or Microsoft shop solely. I hope you found this information useful. If you have any questions, please feel free to reach out to me. I'd love to talk to you. You can reach me at taftlaw.com. Thank you. Tell you all about them. That sounds really stupid.